A world before life. 4.5 billion years ago, Earth was not the blue and green world we know today. It was a fiery, chaotic place, a realm of molten rock and violent storms where meteors rained down like cosmic bullets. The land was barren, the oceans lifeless, and the air thick with toxic gases. It was a world where no creature could breathe, no plant could grow, no heart could beat. And yet, something happened. Somewhere in this primordial chaos, lifeless matter found a way to awaken. Molecules that had no will, no purpose, no ability to reproduce, somehow, inexplicably, came together and formed the first flicker of life. But how? How did inanimate chemicals give rise to something so complex, so self-sustaining, so alive? Was it a fortunate accident? A cosmic inevitability? Or is the truth far more mysterious than we can imagine? Today, we embark on a journey to uncover the origins of life, a mystery that has puzzled humanity for centuries. We will travel back in time, billions of years, to witness the birth of the first living organisms. We will explore scientific breakthroughs that bring us closer to understanding life's deepest secrets. And perhaps, in unlocking this mystery, we may find the answer to an even bigger question. Are we truly alone in the universe? The primordial Earth. To understand the origins of life, we must first step into a time machine and travel back to a world that is almost unrecognizable. Imagine an Earth where the sky is thick with volcanic ash, where lightning crackles across a turbulent atmosphere, where meteors strike the surface with the force of nuclear explosions. The land is barren and cracked, rivers of lava carving through a wasteland of rock. There are no forests, no oceans teeming with life, only a boiling, churning sea of chemicals. This was the world 4 billion years ago, a place of destruction, but also of potential. Scientists believe that amidst this chaos, something remarkable was happening. Deep within Earth's early oceans, a vast, swirling soup of chemicals was brewing. It was a mixture of water, gases, and minerals, ingredients that one day would form the foundation of life itself. But how could lifeless chemicals suddenly come together to create something alive? That question has haunted scientists for generations. And in 1953, two men set out to find an answer. Stanley Miller and Miller-Urey believed that if they could recreate the conditions of early Earth, they might be able to witness the first steps of life itself. Inside a laboratory, they built a sealed glass chamber, a miniature version of Earth's ancient atmosphere. They filled it with gases like methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, gases believed to have existed billions of years ago. Then they added water, creating an artificial ocean. But something was still missing: energy. And so they introduced electricity, flashes of lightning, the same kind of energy that once crackled across Earth's violent sky. Then they waited. Days passed. Then weeks. And finally, the moment of truth arrived. The once clear water had turned dark and murky. And when they analyzed it, they found something astonishing: amino acids. The very building blocks of life. It was a breakthrough that shook the scientific world. For the first time, humans had recreated the first steps of life in a laboratory. But this was only the beginning. Amino acids alone are not life. They are merely ingredients. To create something truly alive, these molecules needed to organize themselves into something far greater. And this is where the mystery deepens: the first living cells. If amino acids were the letters, what wrote the book of life? The answer might lie in an extraordinary molecule, RNA. Unlike DNA, which serves as a blueprint, RNA is a multi-purpose molecule. It can store information like DNA, but it can also perform chemical reactions. It can self-replicate, change, and evolve. It is the molecule that may have bridged the gap between lifeless chemicals and the first living cells. But where did it come from? Some scientists believe RNA may have spontaneously assembled in Earth's early oceans, forming simple structures that could copy themselves. Others argue that life's building blocks may not have formed on Earth at all, that they arrived from space, carried by comets and asteroids. This idea, known as panspermia, suggests that life, or at least its ingredients, may be universal, scattered across the cosmos, waiting to take root. But regardless of where it began, one thing is certain. At some point, simple molecules gave rise to the first true living cell. And from that moment on, life would never stop evolving. The Great Oxygen Revolution. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth's first life forms remained microscopic, tiny, single-celled organisms drifting in the oceans. And then, a new kind of organism emerged, one that would change everything: cyanobacteria. Unlike the simple life forms before them, cyanobacteria had discovered a secret: photosynthesis. For the first time in Earth's history, a living creature could capture sunlight and turn it into energy. And in the process, it released something that had never existed in large amounts before: oxygen. At first, it was harmless. But as more and more cyanobacteria spread across the oceans, oxygen levels skyrocketed. To the early organisms of Earth, this was a catastrophe. Oxygen was toxic to them. It burned, it destroyed, it wiped out countless species. But for those that survived, it opened the door to something greater: multicellular life. With oxygen came complexity. Cells began to join together, forming the first true organisms. And over millions of years, these organisms grew more diverse, more complex, more advanced, until finally, life took its first steps onto land. From microscopes to human mind, life had conquered the land, evolving into creatures of all shapes and sizes: fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. And then one species emerged that was unlike any before. A species that could think, that could wonder, that could ask, where did we come from? From a lifeless rock to a world teeming with consciousness, Earth's journey has been one of mystery, chaos, and wonder. But even now, with all our knowledge, the ultimate question remains unanswered. Did life emerge by chance, or was it destined to happen? And if life could arise here on this tiny blue planet, could it exist elsewhere? As we search the stars for signs of life beyond our world, perhaps the greatest mystery still lies within us. Because to truly understand where we are going, we must first understand where we began: the leap from chemicals to life. For millions of years, Earth remained a world of simple molecules swirling in the vast oceans, a planet rich in raw materials but devoid of life. And yet somewhere, somehow, the first tiny structures began to form, structures that would eventually lead to the first true living cells. This is the story of life's first great transformation, the moment when chemistry gave way to biology, the moment when the inanimate world awoke. But how? How did a lifeless planet produce something that could grow, change, and evolve? Today, we unravel this mystery. We will explore the hidden forces that may have sculpted the first living cells. We will journey to the ocean's depths, where heat and chemistry may have sparked the origin of life. And we will uncover the strange, ancient molecules that might have been the key to life's first breath. This is the next step in our journey, a step billions of years in the making. Deep beneath the ocean's surface, where sunlight cannot reach, lies a hidden world. A world of towering black chimneys that spew boiling hot water into the abyss. These are hydrothermal vents, cracks in the seafloor where Earth's heat escapes in violent mineral-rich plumes. At first glance, they seem like places where nothing could survive. And yet, even in this extreme environment, life thrives. Strange tube-like creatures cling to the vents, feeding off the chemicals in the water. Microorganisms flourish in the darkness, harnessing energy from the Earth itself. Could this have been where life began? Some scientists believe that hydrothermal vents provided the perfect conditions for life's first spark. The vents released gases and minerals into the water, creating a natural chemical laboratory. Here, simple molecules could combine and transform, forming complex chains of carbon-based compounds. And then something remarkable happened. The first self-replicating molecules emerged. These molecules had an ability no other chemical had ever possessed before. They could copy themselves. And with that, a new era began. The power of RNA. To understand life's beginnings, we must look beyond DNA, the molecule that carries the genetic code of all living things today. Before DNA, there was something simpler, something more ancient. RNA is a unique molecule. Like DNA, it can store information. But unlike DNA, it can also act like an enzyme, performing chemical reactions on its own. And most importantly, it can make copies of itself. This means that in the ancient oceans of Earth, RNA may have been the key ingredient in life's first great leap. Imagine this, a microscopic world where tiny strands of RNA float in the water. Some strands are unstable, breaking apart before they can replicate. But others are stronger. They survive, they copy themselves, and in doing so, they evolve. Over millions of years, these tiny molecules began to interact. They formed protective bubbles, primitive membranes that shielded them from the harsh world outside. These bubbles were the first step towards something extraordinary. The first cell. The birth of the first cells. At some point, RNA molecules became trapped inside these protective bubbles. And when they did, something incredible happened. These bubbles were no longer just loose molecules floating in the ocean. They had become something greater. They had become protocells, the ancestors of all life on Earth. But they were still fragile, still primitive. They could replicate, but they had no control over their environment. They were at the mercy of the oceans, tossed by the currents, broken apart by waves. And then, the most important change in life's history occurred. Protocells evolved a new way to survive. They began to absorb nutrients from their surroundings. They found ways to create energy. They learned how to sustain themselves. They became alive. And with that, the first cells were born. These cells were simple. No nucleus, no organelles, just a thin membrane protecting the delicate chemistry inside. But they were life's first great success story. They spread across the oceans, multiplying, adapting, evolving. For the first time in Earth's history, the planet was no longer lifeless. It had become home to something new, something living. The first survival strategies. But life, no matter how small, must compete to survive. In the ancient oceans, single-celled organisms faced constant threats. Some cells were fragile, unable to withstand changes in temperature or pressure. Others lacked the ability to reproduce fast enough to keep up with their environment. But the cells that survived, they were the ones that found ways to adapt. Some developed stronger membranes, shielding them from harmful chemicals. Others evolved ways to break down molecules for energy, allowing them to grow faster and multiply more efficiently. The most successful cells were those that discovered the secret of cooperation. Instead of existing as isolated individuals, some cells began to work together, forming colonies. By sharing resources, they could survive longer, outcompete weaker organisms, and expand across the planet. It was the beginning of something much bigger, the Great Cellular Revolution. For hundreds of millions of years, life remained simple, tiny, single-celled organisms drifting in the oceans. But then, something changed. Cells began to merge. At first, it was an accident, one cell engulfing another. But instead of digesting it, the two formed a partnership. The engulfed cell provided energy, while the host cell provided protection. This was one of the most important moments in evolutionary history. It gave rise to a new kind of cell, eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells were different from the simple bacteria that came before them. They were larger, more complex, more powerful. Inside them were tiny structures called organelles, specialized parts that performed different tasks, much like the organs in a human body. One of these organelles, the mitochondrion, became the powerhouse of the cell, allowing it to generate more energy than ever before. With this new source of power, eukaryotic cells could grow bigger, reproduce faster, and adapt more quickly. And then, something extraordinary happened. Some of these cells began to come together, not as colonies, but as true multicellular organisms. For the first time in history, life was no longer just individual cells floating in the ocean. Life had taken the next step. It had become something far greater. From lifeless molecules to self-replicating RNA. From tiny protocells to the first living organisms. From simple bacteria to complex eukaryotic cells, life had conquered its first great challenge. It had found a way to survive. But this was only the beginning. The first cells had opened the door to something even greater. The rise of plants, animals, and eventually, us. The journey of life was just getting started. The moment when single-celled organisms gave rise to the incredible explosion of life that would one day shape the world as we know it. Evolution, from simple to complex life. For billions of years, Earth had been home only to single-celled life. Tiny, microscopic organisms drifting in the ancient oceans, too small to be seen, too simple to build anything complex. But then, something changed. A silent revolution began beneath the waves. Single cells found a way to join together. They started working as a team, sharing resources, communicating, and forming the first multicellular organisms. This was the moment when life began to diversify at an unimaginable pace. In the blink of a geological eye, the first animals appeared. creatures with eyes, limbs, and nervous systems. How did this happen? How did life make the leap from simple microbes to the complex web of existence we see today? To find the answer, we must travel back in time, to the moment when Earth experienced its greatest explosion of life. This is the next chapter in the story of life's origins, the moment when evolution took hold and changed our planet forever. The first microscopic life forms. For millions of years, life on Earth was ruled by single-celled organisms. These tiny creatures, bacteria and archaea, thrived in the ancient oceans, feeding on minerals, sunlight, and even each other. They were the architects of Earth's first ecosystems, shaping the chemistry of the planet in ways that would determine the course of evolution. But single-celled life had its limits. To survive, these organisms needed a new way to grow, to evolve, to adapt. And the answer came in the form of cooperation. Some cells discovered that by sticking together, they could accomplish more. They could form colonies where different cells performed different tasks. They could exchange nutrients, defend against threats, and even communicate using chemical signals. It was a small step, but one that would lead to the greatest leap in life's history: the rise of multicellular life. At first, these early multicellular creatures were nothing more than clusters of identical cells, floating colonies with no true specialization. But then, over millions of years, something incredible happened. Some cells began to change. Instead of every cell doing the same thing, some took on specific roles. Some became responsible for movement, others for digestion, others for sensing the environment. This was the first division of labor, a breakthrough that allowed life to grow larger, stronger, and more complex than ever before. The first true multicellular organisms had arrived, and with them, evolution took off at a staggering pace. After billions of years of microscopic existence, suddenly exploded into an astonishing variety of new forms. This period is known as the Cambrian Explosion, one of the most important events in evolutionary history. In just a few million years, the oceans became filled with strange and diverse creatures. The first animals with hard shells, protecting them from predators. The first creatures with eyes, giving them the ability to see for the first time. The first predators, hunting their prey in an ancient underwater arms race. For the first time in Earth's history, ecosystems began to take shape. Creatures were no longer just floating microorganisms. They were swimming, crawling, hunting, and hiding. It was the birth of modern animal life. But what caused this sudden explosion of diversity? Scientists believe that several factors played a role. Increased oxygen levels. More oxygen in the oceans allowed life to grow larger and more active. The first animals to develop eyes had a huge advantage, sparking a rapid arms race between predator and prey. The evolution of new genes allowed creatures to develop new body shapes, structures, and abilities. The result was an evolutionary explosion, unlike anything before or since. But even with all this progress, life was still confined to the oceans. That was about to change. For millions of years, Earth's land was a barren, lifeless wasteland, silent and empty. But as life thrived in the oceans, a new challenge emerged. What if creatures could leave the water behind and conquer the land? The journey from sea to land was one of the most difficult transitions in evolutionary history. Creatures that had evolved to live underwater now had to face gravity, dry air, and an entirely new way of moving. The first pioneers were simple plants and fungi, which began colonizing the damp edges of lakes and rivers. These early land dwellers helped transform the landscape, creating the first soils and preparing the way for more complex organisms. Then, small invertebrates, possibly ancient arthropods, began to crawl onto land, searching for food and shelter. But the biggest breakthrough came when fish-like creatures evolved limbs. These early amphibians, descendants of lobe-finned fish, were the first vertebrates to venture onto dry land. They had lungs to breathe air and stronger skeletons to support their weight outside of water. Step by step, these brave pioneers explored the shores, and with them, life had officially left the oceans forever. Over millions of years, life on land flourished. The first amphibians gave rise to reptiles, creatures that were no longer tied to water. They laid hard-shelled eggs, allowing them to live entirely on land. Reptiles soon dominated the planet, evolving into massive creatures that would rule for over 150 million years. They were the dinosaurs. For an unimaginable stretch of time, dinosaurs were the undisputed kings of the Earth. They evolved into thousands of different species, from towering plant eaters to fearsome predators like Tyrannosaurus rex. But then, disaster struck. 66 million years ago, a catastrophic asteroid impact wiped out the dinosaurs, ending their reign in an instant. And in the ashes of that destruction, mammals, once small and insignificant, began to rise. These warm-blooded creatures, with their fur and advanced brains, slowly took over the empty world left behind by the dinosaurs. Some remained small. Others grew into the first primates. And one day, millions of years later, one primate species would rise above all others. A species that would change the world forever. A species that would become us. From single-celled microbes to towering dinosaurs. From tiny creatures in the ocean to the first humans standing on two legs. The journey of life has been a 4 billion year-long adventure. But it all started with one simple question. How did life begin? We have uncovered many answers about RNA, about cells, about evolution. But the deeper we look, the more mysteries we find. Because life's greatest question is not just about the past. It's about the future. A creature that would not just survive but ask questions. A creature that would wonder where it came from. A creature that would change the world forever. The story of life on Earth was nearing its most profound chapter, the rise of human intelligence. But how did we become the thinking, creating, exploring species we are today? To find out, we must take one final journey, a journey into the origins of the human mind. The origin of humans, the intelligent species, a new kind of life. For billions of years, Earth had been shaped by evolution, by creatures that crawled, swam, and flew, each adapting to their environment through the relentless force of natural selection. Life had conquered every corner of the planet, from the deep oceans to the highest mountains. But then, something extraordinary happened. A creature appeared that was unlike any before. A creature that did not just survive, but thought. A creature that would not only adapt to its environment, but change it. Humans. But how did we come to be? How did a simple primate living in the trees evolve into a species capable of art, language, technology, and space exploration? This is the story of our origins. The story of how we became the most intelligent species on Earth. The story of humans begins not with humans at all, but with our ancient ancestors, primates. Millions of years ago, the world was ruled by mammals. Among them were small tree-dwelling creatures with grasping hands and forward-facing eyes. These were the first primates, distant relatives of monkeys, apes, and eventually, us. Living in the trees gave them an advantage. Their eyesight improved, allowing them to see depth and judge distances. Their hands evolved to grasp branches and manipulate objects. Their brains grew larger, helping them navigate complex environments. Then, around 7 million years ago, something changed. A group of primates left the trees and stepped onto the open African savanna. These early ancestors, known as hominins, were different from anything that had come before. They walked on two legs. This change, bipedalism, would alter the course of evolution forever. Walking on two legs may seem simple, but it was a revolutionary development. It allowed early humans to see farther, spotting food and predators more easily. Use their hands for tools, carrying objects, and eventually, building civilizations. Conserve energy, allowing them to travel long distances in search of food. At first, these early humans were primitive. They had no fire, no language, no tools beyond simple rocks. But something remarkable was happening inside their skulls. Their brains were growing, and with a bigger brain came new possibilities. Around 2.5 million years ago, a new species emerged, Homo habilis, or handy man. For the first time, an early human was creating tools. Not just using sticks and stones, but shaping them, crafting weapons, carving food, and changing the way they interacted with the world. This was a turning point. For the first time, survival was not just about physical strength, it was about intelligence. But intelligence alone was not enough. To truly thrive, early humans needed something even more powerful: cooperation. Somewhere around 1 million years ago, another breakthrough changed everything. Humans discovered fire. Fire was more than just warmth. It cooked food, making it easier to digest and giving humans more energy. It kept predators away, allowing humans to sleep safely through the night. It became a gathering point, strengthening social bonds and communication. And then, something even bigger happened. Language. Early humans developed a way to share knowledge, to warn each other of danger, to pass down stories from one generation to the next. With language, knowledge no longer had to die with an individual. It could be shared, built upon, and expanded. This was the moment when humans stopped being just another animal and started becoming something much more. For millions of years, humans lived in small groups, hunting and gathering food. But then around 12,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Humans discovered agriculture. For the first time, instead of wandering in search of food, they could grow their own. This changed everything. Farming meant settlements. Settlements became villages. Villages became cities. Cities became civilizations. With farming, humans had more time. Time to build, time to invent, time to think. They created writing, mathematics, art, and religion. They built monuments, formed governments, and went to war. They began to shape the world around them, bending nature to their will. And in doing so, they became the most powerful species on the planet. But power comes with a cost. Humans had won the battle for survival. But with intelligence came new challenges. We changed the planet, cutting down forests, building cities, and altering ecosystems. We fought wars, not just for survival, but for land, wealth, and power. We created technology, powerful tools that could help or destroy us. For the first time in history, a species had the power to shape its own future. Would we use it wisely, or would we become the architects of our own downfall? The choice is still being made. Where do we go from here? From a tiny single-celled organism floating in the ancient oceans to a thinking, exploring, world-building species. The journey of life has been nothing short of astonishing. We are not the first form of life on Earth, but we are the first to ask where we came from. We are the first to look up at the stars and wonder if we are alone. We are the first to hold the power to shape our own future. But as we stand at the dawn of a new age, an age of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and space travel, one question remains. Are we the final step in evolution? Or are we just the beginning of something even greater? The story of life on Earth is far from over, and the next chapter is up to us. Final words, a message to the future. As humans, we often think we are the pinnacle of evolution. But what if we are just another step? What if millions of years from now, something even more intelligent than us will look back and wonder, how did life begin? And maybe, just maybe, they'll find the answer in the story we leave behind. The end, or just the beginning,